You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 29th of September 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Tom Edwards. Coming up on today's programme, Moldova votes decisively for a pro-EU party to lead the nation.
Moldova will have the chance to continue to strengthen its democracy, to protect its peace, and to continue its EU integration path.
We'll consider what this means for other young democracies and for the wider European bloc. Then we'll be looking to China and considering how modern propaganda wars are also being fought on the silver screen. And still to come, some cheese news.
I think a lot of people say, actually, cheese works better on a conveyor belt than sushi.
That's right. We're asking and answering the really big questions today on The Briefing with me, Tom Edwards. Hey, very warm welcome to today's programme. Great to have you with us for this Monday edition of The Briefing on Monocle Radio. We do start the show in Moldova, where voters have delivered a decisive win for the pro-European government, rejecting Moscow-leaning parties after a bitter campaign marred by allegations of Russian interference at the ballot box. I'm joined now for more on this by Monocle's producer and resident Romanian Laura Kramer. Good afternoon, Laura.
Good afternoon, Tom.
Now, tell me, a consequential election, and it's one of these ones where there was more riding on it than just the domestic picture. Of course, the incumbent has been returned, but with a bigger majority. They won't need to work in any kind of coalition now. Bring us back up to speed. What were the official results? And I guess most importantly, Laura, what do they mean going forwards?
Yeah, so President Maia Sandu's pro-European Action and Solidarity Party, PAS, has won just over 50% of the vote, enough to secure a majority in Moldova's 101-seat parliament. Now, that gives her a clear mandate to push ahead with reforms and keep the country on course for EU membership. As you alluded to earlier, due to all this, there was a lot at stake about whether the country would deepen ties with the EU or risk drifting back under Moscow's influence. The president did speak at length ahead of the vote about her fears about what would have happened had it gone the other way. Moldova was at risk of being used as essentially a launching ground for Russian weapons against Ukraine. She said Russia could train people for illegal operations in the EU and launch drones there, just as it was doing from Belarus. On the ground, though, a lot of people there were simply worried about their own chances to be able to travel freely. There's a big diaspora in Europe, and the questions about their movements and ability to work abroad was at stake. And especially thinking about Moldova, where it stands, it's between Ukraine and Romania, and it has a very close to Odessa too, which is very important for Russia. So a lot at stake in this election. And
it's interesting looking at the bloc wide. Ursula von der Leyen was really kind of clear in her pronouncements after the success of PS was sort of apparent after the weekend. You made your choice clear. Europe, democracy, freedom. Our door is open, which will presumably provide succor to many of the pro-European watchers within Moldova. What about Russian interference, Laura? Because it's always a narrative with virtually any continental election, whether it's kind of closer to the front line or not. What do we know about the nature of that interference? Clearly, it didn't work if it was happening.
Yeah, the president had warned throughout the campaign of the massive Russian meddling, and authorities reported disinformation campaigns, illicit funding of parties, and even bomb scares at polling stations abroad, in Italy, Romania, and Belgium, just to name a few of those countries. Moscow, of course, denies this, but election monitors say attempts to sway voters were real and very well organized. Now, to give you a sense of how big of a problem this was, there were more than 14 million cyber attacks that targeted government and electoral systems. Now, Moldova had blocked about 4,000 websites in an attempt to neutralize the constant cyber attacks. And they even got the country's religious leaders involved, with hundreds of Moldovan Orthodox priests and clergy had been invited on all expensive trips to Russia. They visited religious sites and attended lectures stressing Moldova, Russian unity, and received vouchers and debit cards from the Russian state bank. Now, some of the priests reported receiving around $1,200 each. That's more than double of Moldova's average monthly income. So some said the payments were tied to creating these Telegram channels and pushing anti-EU, pro-traditional values type messaging. And after the trips, interestingly, nearly 90 new Telegram channels appeared spreading this anti-EU content, warning against quote-unquote gay Europe and promoting ties with Russia.
Laura, what happens next? It's interesting and instructive, I think, if you look at Donald Tusk, again, another sort of key European figure over a number of years, Polish PM again now, of course. He said that Moldovans have saved democracy. It's stopped Russian attempts to take a wider control over a wider region. What does happen next? And I suppose the challenge for Sandu and her colleagues is to actually get on with the business of, running the country, both within and without this broader context. But what does the next few, months and years look like?
Yeah, so Maya Sandu now has the numbers to govern without coalition partners, as you said, which should give her more stability. But it's a case of winning the battle and keeping an eye on the bigger war. The challenges are big for her. They're facing tackling corruption and rising prices at home to keep Moldova safe, and also on track for the eventual EU accession, all while Russia does continue to apply pressure, especially from the breakaway Transnistria region, which many warn is essentially a Trojan horse in Moldova, where 1,500 Russian troops are also still remain stationed.
Laura, thanks very much for that. And we've, of course, been following the story on our programmes earlier today on Monocle Radio, and will track developments as they happen on the Daily and on the Globalist tomorrow. You can find out about all those shows, as always, at the website monocle.com. Plenty going on today. Our Tom Webb has been watching the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Tom. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to meet US President Donald Trump in the Oval Office following the US proposal to stop the war in Gaza. It is believed the plan says Hamas must release all 48 remaining captives in Gaza, about 20 of whom are believed to be alive, within 2 days. Overseas, Hong Kong activist Nathan Law has been refused entry to Singapore. The Ministry of Home Affairs says his presence would not be in the country's national interest. Law fled Hong Kong in 2020 after an arrest warrant was issued against him for offences under their national security law. The National Museum of South Korea has been bringing history to life with a show of human embodiments of their most famous ancient artefacts. Costumes of pottery, Buddha statues and paintings have been strutting down a red carpet runway. University art historian and author Yoo Hong-yoon was appointed the new director of the National Museum this summer in a hope to bring new life to the institute. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom. We'll have more news headlines for you, of course, at the top of the next hour and on the hour throughout the day here on Monocle Radio. Next up on the briefing, in China, a new anti-Japanese film has become a major hit. The new picture, called Evil Unbound, earned over $270 million in its first week, depicting Japan's Unit 731 biological weapons program during the Second World War. Why is this film resonating with audiences in China now? Well, I'm delighted to say I'm joined now by Yoko Kubota, the Wall Street Journal's Deputy Bureau Chief in Beijing, and alongside me in London, Monocle Senior Correspondent and cinephile Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Yoko, let me come to you first of all. Thanks for being with us on the programme. Just tell us a little bit more about what kind of movie this is and exactly how popular it's proven to be in China. It certainly put up the numbers.
Sure, that's right. Thanks for having me. And so, as you've mentioned, it's a movie about Unit 731 during World War II. And that's a very infamous unit of the Japanese Imperial Army that conducted germ warfare and chemical experiments on live humans. And the film was released on September 18th. So it's only been, about a week or a little bit over a week. And that's the date of the anniversary Japan's invasion of China in 1931. So it hasn't been all that long, but it has been a big hit. In fact, I think it's been among the most popular movies, being not only just being screened now, but for this year. I think it's already ranking among the, top 5 films released this year so far.
Well, yeah, and we'll talk a bit more to Fernando here in London, Yoko, in a moment about how widespread it's becoming to see this sort of propaganda playing out on the silver screen. But can you tell me, Yoko, why this popularity why is it working now? Is it, do you think that, I don't know, the sort of Politburo has seen how effective cinema continues to be to sort of reach the public and to get a popular message across? Or was this kind of the sort of cultural capital that they've been trying to move and trying to do in any case?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it is a big anniversary year this year. It's the 80th anniversary since, China's victory and the end of World War II. So there are just in general these kinds of war-related cultural productions, including these films. There are a couple this year already, and TV shows and other formats as well. But I guess, there are a couple of other reasons in terms of why it's popular. One, there's definitely a lot of state media reports on this film, kind of promoting it, other kinds of promotions as well. So people are just, seeing that this film is out there and going to it. There's also kind of coordinated efforts at schools or at companies to go and watch this film. So they might take tours to the film theater and watch this. And that's also a bunch of people going to the theater. And I think, the other factor is the Chinese title of the film is just very straightforward. It's 731. And I think the public is curious, they want to know more about what actually happened with Unit 731. So there are all of these factors combined. Maybe I can talk a little bit about some notable things about the film. I mean, there's atrocities described of what the Japanese soldiers did in the film. It's very graphic. But there are also elements that are quite novel, at least to me, contemporary ways of telling this historical experience. When I watched it, it included, a survival game-like plot near the end. So the Chinese and Korean and Soviet captives, in this unit site is trying to escape the site while they face a series of deadly challenges. It almost echoed, Squid Game or video games, survival games. So that's quite contemporary. There were some other elements, how Japanese culture is portrayed in the film that was quite stylized, almost a little bit surreal. So I felt that these contemporary elements on top of the historical and quite brutal scenes, it's a combination of that might also be attracting younger generation to this kind of historical topic film.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you can stay with us because I want to ask you about the longer term potential impact of this kind of movie in a second. But let me just bring Fernando in here because, Faye, it's interesting, Yoko, talking about not just the subject matter, but also some of the techniques and how effective they're becoming. And we've spoken before about it's a big year for sort of, I don't want to call it revisionism because some of them it's faithfully portraying real events. But we saw it with this film in Vietnam we spoke about a few weeks ago. We had a slightly more experimental Taiwanese film, really gamifying a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan. We're seeing it more and more. Is that because just the tools at filmmakers' disposal, I guess, are also better, right, to a degree?
They are indeed. So, I mean, the Vietnamese film, it's an incredible story, Red Rain, which the film portrays, this brutal battle that lasted for 81 days in Quang Tri Citadel in 1972, of course, during the Vietnam War. And the production levels of the film is astounding, I think. And perhaps, successfully so, it became the most popular Vietnamese film ever. 8.1 million Vietnamese people went to the cinema. It became an event, like schools, they went to the cinemas for trips like that. And I think there's a sense of patriotism as well among the Vietnamese with this film. But it's funny, I don't know if it's a coincidence, but I see this across the continent, across Asia in general. Even in India, there's an upcoming production, and I've just seen the trailer. I mean, lots of high production values as well, and it's called 120 Bahadur, which talks about the Indian soldiers fighting against Chinese troops in the 1972 Sino-Indian War. So it's interesting to see all those battles on the screen and big production levels. It looks like a Christopher Nolan film, like a Dunkirk. And let's be honest, Hollywood has always been done that, right? So perhaps it's time for those countries also perhaps to show a little bit of their history as well.
And Faye, just on this sort of soft power muscle flexing here, does this sit easy or uneasy with you? Cinema has always been political. Filmmakers have always dabbled with either explicitly with propaganda or they've leaned into it. How does it sit with you? Is it okay as long as people retain some perspective? I guess it depends what your view of how the censors are running this material. But I don't know. It's part and parcel of what the cinematic experience has always been.
I think so. I don't see a problem. Of course, freedom of expression is great. And even I think the Taiwanese case is quite interesting as well, that it was quite a brave thing to do as well. And I think the series did quite well. Of course, there were some challenges here and there. But, I don't see an issue. As I said, I think Hollywood has done that. And people want to see this portrayed on the screen. There's clearly an appetite for that. It's not just about anime or fantasy. They want to see a good war film, perhaps a little bit of propaganda as well.
Well, Yoko Kubota, let me bring you back in here, because to this point, what's the long-term impact? One imagines that, well, it's quite hard to measure, right? Especially younger audiences. And it's hard to track what they make of these depictions, representations of things that potentially happened, many decades before they were even existent. Do you think these kinds of films will have a longer term impact? Let's look at, say, Sino-Japanese relations. What do you think the impact will be?
Right. So, when I look at the response of the younger generation to the film that we talked about, and also other films, as well as there's even stuff like microdramas, very short videos and war-themed stories that's been released these days. So all kinds of cultural productions. But, we also see very patriotic responses. You got to study hard and, serve the country, these kind of responses among the young. But I've also heard realistic voices from people that watched the film where they didn't quite understand it, or didn't necessarily feel like the story was told well. So there is patriotism, there's nationalism, and that might be on the rise, but there are also people watching it, with, how do you say, objective or cool eyes, and trying to take the film in as it is. But yeah, if nationalism rises too much, of course, that would raise concerns in Japan. It could give negative impressions if, very negative messages are being sent in China about Japan. I think nationalism is a double-edged sword. And it's to vilify the Japanese is probably an effective and relatively easy way for China or the Communist Party to rile the public. But at the same time, when it goes too far, it could come back somehow against them, or protests could go out of control. So they would want to be careful about that. And one more thing is, the two countries have different facets of relationships. So there are a lot of people probably feeling a stronger sense of nationalism after watching some of these movies. But at the same time, there are also a lot of Chinese people coming to Japan as tourists. The peak was 2019, and the numbers are going back again after the pandemic. So there are different elements to the relationship between the two countries. And one last thing, Japan also has, historical World War II films as well. So each side is looking at how to think about history, how to tell the history, and how to portray that time, that period of history.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. Yoko, thanks for making sense of it for us. From your vantage point in Beijing, that was Yoko Kubota from the Wall Street Journal. Faye, here in the studio, thanks for joining us as well. Fernando Augusto Pacheco are with us here on The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Finally, on today's programme, and as advertised at the top, is it Brie you're looking for? A leading expert in fromage, Matthew Carver, has opened the world's first cheese conveyor belt restaurant. Pick and Cheese, see what he's done there, offers plate after plate of no less than 25 different small producer cheeses along its 130-foot-long electronic belt. It's exciting. Opened now in London. Matthew's certainly not taking it cheesy at all, already with plans to open in Berlin and other destinations. He sat down with Monocle's Tom Webb to explain how conveyor belt cheese is simply better than the alternatives, and how he got his big eureka moment.
The reason we started the business was to try and make good British cheese more accessible and try and serve it in a bit more of a fun and informal way. And I was thinking about how we could open a cheese and wine restaurant that was kind of different to your regular kind of faux French establishments that already exist. And I was reading a book actually on a beach in Mexico about the guy who decided to put sushi on a conveyor belt. And he said that the reason he was doing it was because at the time sushi was really served for the kind of more wealthy customer base, and he wanted to make it more accessible and more fun. And I found kind of similarities between what we wanted to do and thought, wow, cheese would work fantastic on a conveyor belt.
Are you saying cheese is not accessible to the masses?
Cheese is accessible to the masses. I'm talking about really good British cheese from small producers.
And we're going to broaden this out because it's not just British cheese on the menu. You have eyes around the world. You've already got a big old hand in Berlin.
Yeah, so we opened our first restaurant in London 5 years ago, and we've just opened a restaurant in Berlin in May where we champion German cheese. So we work directly with lots of small German cheesemakers, small German farmers, sourcing incredible German cheese, and then, put it on the conveyor belt.
Now, how has the conveyor belt been received? Are people looking at it with absolute bemusement, or are they saying, this is just genius, I've wasted all my life for this moment?
I think genius. I mean, I don't want to sound arrogant, but I think a lot of people say, actually, cheese works better on a conveyor belt than sushi. I mean, cheese generally should be served at room temperature. It's one of the biggest crimes against cheese is to serve it cold. So sitting on a conveyor belt at room temperature is the perfect environment for it. So people, I think, find it quite novel, but also feel like it's a really good way to try new cheeses.
Now, please enlighten our listeners, actually just me, because I pull my cheese out the fridge every time I eat it. Where have I gone so wrong?
Most foods, straight from the fridge, you won't get the full breadth of flavours. The chill kind of holds the flavours in. And so really, when it comes up to room temperature, you get so much more flavour.
Now, you get so much more flavour by pairing your cheeses as they whip round the room. How did you come up with the pairings? What sort of science goes behind a particular pickle?
Oof, science, maybe not, but tasting a lot. I think for us, we wanted to kind of elevate the idea of cheese being on a conveyor belt and try and make the experience as good as we could. And so each of the cheeses is served with like a unique pairing or condiment. And we wanted those to be kind of chef-led and really interesting. And I think to kind of push people to try new things. So we do like a kind of Cornish Gouda with a clotted cream fudge, or Stilton with kimchi. And just kind of, I suppose, shaking it up from that traditional cheese and chutney.
Now, if I'm on holiday, I'm in one of the cities where you operate, and I've had my breakfast, I've had my lunch. I'm now looking for somewhere to have dinner. Are you serving me a 3-course meal of just cheese? Does that work?
For some people it does, yeah. I think the beauty about pick and cheese is that it's as much or as little as you want it to be. You can come, if you've had your breakfast, come for a quick snack, have a couple of cheese plates and a glass of wine in the afternoon, come for a full dinner. We serve a few hot dishes as well, like a baked cheese or a grilled cheese sandwich, and make a dinner of it. Or if you want a little dessert after dinner, you can come and grab a seat at the bar and have a sweet wine and a cheese plate to finish the night.
What about those that want to use a very specific window of time to do an all-you-can-eat cheese? Tell me there's an option.
We've ticked that box as well. So every Wednesday we do what we call bottomless plates, where for 1 hour and 15 minutes you can grab a seat at the bar and you can try every cheese if you feel you are capable of doing that.
Now, what's next for the business? We've mentioned Berlin. There are some things we can't talk about, but if you were to have a fantasy country, a fantasy location, rich with cheese, where you could just set up one of your conveyor belts, where?
I think the dream would probably be Paris. I think it's like the heart of cheese. The nice thing about opening in a new country for us is getting to explore like a new cheese culture and seeing really what makes that country and that kind of cheese culture tick. And France, I think that would be an incredible country to delve into the cheese world.
A long-standing cheesy history. Are there countries that are experimenting in ways of cheese you've just never seen before?
Oof, good question. I think Germany, to be fair. I think for us, we found that Germany is kind of similar in the UK in the sense that its cheese culture is maybe underappreciated a little bit in that country. And they have they're undergoing like a real moment when it comes to small producers making some really outstanding cheeses. And I think it's an exciting time to kind of showcase that.
From a good question to a terrible finisher, we're going to have to get your favourite cheese. I'm sorry, I know everyone asked you, but here we are.
Here we are. It sort of fluctuates. I think it's a really tricky question to answer. At the moment, today, I have been trying some cheeses for the new menu at Pick and Cheese, and there's a really amazing sheep's milk cheese from Derby called Wakebridge, and they've only been making it for the last year, but it's an incredible cheese.
That was Pick and Cheese founder Matthew Carver talking to Monocle's Tom Webb, and we wish him good luck with his restaurants. I must just say, I asked Fernando Augusto Pacheco for his favourite kind of cheese before the show, and he said sliced, which is just completely ridiculous. That is all we have time for on this damn good edition of The Briefing. I will stop those now. It was produced by Tom Webb, who bears lots of responsibility for the cheese puns. Research by Daniela Braw-Smith. Our studio manager was Mariella Bevan. More at the same time tomorrow, though maybe less cheese. That's all from me. Thanks for listening.